How does ranked choice voting work? This is an important question if we want some options for fixing our democracy. So let's get into it. And to explain this, I'm going to assume these 6 people are running for office. And of course, some of them are more popular than others. Now, the first thing you need to understand if we're thinking about this is that there's lots of different types of voting systems. In many systems we're used to, you come in and you vote for one person. And of course, if you have a list of 6 candidates and everybody votes for one person, one possibility is that nobody is going to get over 50% of the vote. So let me just show you how that might look. If everybody just votes for one person who's their favorite person, you might get a distribution that looks like this. And of course, in this case, the winner would be Mrs. Norris. So, of course, that's plurality rule. That's one type of voting where you just vote on everybody and the candidate with the most votes wins. But of course, 70% of people could hate Mrs. Norris. Maybe she's loved by 30% and hated by 70%, and this system would put her in power. So another system is majority runoff, where you would say, okay, we took the first vote. We see that Mrs. Norris and Mr. Wickham had the highest number of votes, so we're going to eliminate all of the other candidates, and we're going to run off Mrs. Norris against Mr. Wickham. And it's possible that in that case, Mr. Wickham might win, especially if 70% of people hate Mrs. Norris. And with both of these systems, of course, you might have to think very strategically about who you vote for. For example, if I really liked Jane Dashwood, I might not want to vote for her if I know that not many people like her, and I might not want to waste my vote. So someone who's really decent, who maybe should have a stake in the game, in fact, you could even have a situation where Jane Dashwood is everybody's number 2 choice, everyone who voted for someone else, where maybe she would get eliminated because everybody has their other favorite number 1 choice. So I'm not going to fully explain voting systems here, but the point is that voting systems are complicated. The way you vote can change the result, and you can't really get away from that in any voting system under Arrow's impossibility theorem. In which case, how does ranked choice voting work? Well, you notice with the majority runoff, you actually have to have 2 votes. First, everybody votes on all of the candidates, and then after everyone's voted, then you pick the top 2 and run them against one another. Now, that requires people doing this process twice. And does that happen in the same night, or do you have to go 2 different days to do this ranked choice voting system? Well, if people are effort averse, as they generally are, then a lot of people may not show up to one vote or another. And ideally, you want to include everybody in the decision. And ranked choice voting basically gives you a way of collecting enough information about everybody's preferences to do the runoffs automatically. And it's not going to be exactly the same as majority runoff, so let me show you how this works. So let's say I have a particular preference ordering where my favorite candidate is Jane Dashwood, and my least favorite candidate is Mr. Wickham, and my second least favorite candidate is Mrs. Norris. I could rank on a ballot who's my first choice, who's my second choice, who's my third choice, etc., etc. So let me do my little ballot right here. Now I've filled out my ballot with my first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice, fifth choice, and sixth choice. And of course, for me, the fifth and sixth choice, the worst candidates in this pool, were the ones who ended up in the top in both plurality rule and majority runoff systems. So one of the things that's on a lot of people's minds is that we don't want a system that leaves us with the worst 2 options. We don't want a system where the majority of people hate these 2 candidates, but all of their other candidates they were supporting end up dropping out or being eliminated early in the process. That's something that people would prefer not to happen. Because of course, when you have that, you can get a more polarized situation where the campaign ends up being which is the worst, Mr. Wickham or Mrs. Norris, and it's a very negative sort of campaigning system when you have that set up. All right, so let's watch how this works. Basically, you have a first round where you just run everybody and you see who got the least amount of votes. And obviously in this situation, Mr. Collins will have the least amount of votes. So what we do is we eliminate Mr. Collins and we rerun the vote with all of the other candidates. So in the next round, we only have 5 candidates left, and my new ballot, the system can automatically calculate my new ballot based on my preference ordering. It knows my first 3 choices are still there. My 4th choice has been eliminated, so now Mrs. Norris is my 4th choice and Mr. Wickham is my last choice. It does up that ballot for me automatically, and it can see in the second round I'm also going to vote for Jane Dashwood. And for simplicity, let's just assume the 1% who voted for Mr. Collins, let's just put them on Jane Dashwood for that round. And so it looks at the new percentages and it sees, okay, based on these 4 candidates, Jane Dashwood would be eliminated. Now let's say that everybody who voted for Jane Dashwood or Mr. Collins in the first round, all of them prefer Elizabeth Bennet on this next round. In which case, when we have these 4 candidates and we do this instant runoff based on people's newly calculated ballots, we're going to have Elizabeth Bennet get 28% of the vote. So with these 4 candidates, suddenly we realize, even though Elizabeth Bennet was not in the top 3 in our first vote, suddenly she's beating out Mr. Wickham for sure, and she's gaining steam on Mrs. Norris. So what we have is a situation where maybe most of the population hates Mrs. Norris and Mr. Wickham, but those people end up being the top candidates based on some systems. Under this system, because you do it round by round where people's votes get combined, you can have candidates sort of gain steam if they're not the 2 most hated candidates in a polarized environment. So let's just do one more round of this. Let's say we redo the vote based on people's only submitted once ballot, and we have 4 candidates left. We rerun it and see of these 4 candidates, what does each person vote for? And obviously in this case, Mr. Darcy is going to be eliminated. But very likely, the people who voted for Mr. Darcy are going to vote for Elizabeth Bennet. That's going to suddenly up her votes. She has 44% of the vote. And of course, now she is way ahead of Mr. Norris and Mr. Wickham. And so that's basically how this thing works. It works by sort of letting people rank order their preferences and letting the system rerun the ballots as many times as it needs until one person reaches over 50%. Now, of course, once we're down to 2 candidates, unless it's exactly split, one of those 2 candidates is probably going to win, and in this case, it's probably going to be Elizabeth Bennet. Would you trust a system like this? Do you think it's too complicated? What weaknesses do you see in this sort of system? And if you would like to see some of the strengths and weaknesses that I see in a system like this, I'll put a link to that.